the single largest frontal assault during the American Civil War. The largest battle of the Peninsula Campaign. And it all happens June of 1862. A.P. Hill's men are on this field out here in front of me, and Texas is about to come up. And in the midst of all of the chaos and the carnage that's happening, with the cannons blasting their fire all around, there's a white fox terrier on this field, and it's running around frantically, not sure where to go. It finds its way to a fallen soldier. Stretched out across this field right behind me here, that's one of the locations of the Battle of Gaines' Mill. On that field right there, over 2,000 soldiers fell, wounded or killed. One of which was General Pickett himself, shot in the collarbone. Today, we're at Gaines' Mill. We're going to talk about the 4th Texas, and we're going to talk about their little mascot, and tell the story of how he became a casualty at Antietam. This road that stretches out behind me here is the main road that takes you into the National Parks portion of Gaines' Mill. And the farm fields that stretch out all along this area here, this is a major portion of that battlefield where many soldiers fell, wounded, and killed. Robert E. Lee would have the 4th Texas march their way back up through here. And across that field, way off in the distance over there, right about there, that's where 4th Texas would come in. John Bell Hood and his men were out there on that field getting ready to go into battle. Now, this fight here turns out to be one of the most vicious fights during that 1862 campaign. And there's a lot of people that get hurt out here. But there are also a lot of animals out here, horses and dogs and things like that. And this white fox terrier just happened to be a part of the 4th Texas. So we're going to go over to the field here in a second, and we're going to retrace the path that the 4th actually came in through and walk down through that field out here in 100-degree weather and tell you the story about that dog that was out there on the field, and also kind of retrace the path of the 4th Texas as they transition into this battle. The position that I'm at right now is the first pull-off as you come into the park. And over here there's a monument to the Mississippi units that were out here, particularly the 11th Mississippi that was out here. And Whiting's men would have been roughly in the position that I'm in right now as they were going into battle. So if you can imagine yourself here, here's the Mississippi monument. And Mississippi's out here, some Louisiana Tigers are over there. Off in the distance back in this direction over here, you would have had Hood's men coming in, probably about midfield. And then on the other side of that, Longstreet's men will extend the line out further. There was debate for a while in the papers as to who actually broke through here at Gaines Mill. But at the end of the day, it was no doubt the 4th Texas actually broke through first. Texas pushed that line and caught those Union soldiers in that ravine, really out of ammunition and off guard. So we're going to make our way over there now and going to continue this path talking about the soldiers as they transition through the fight. And what we'll actually do is we'll start on the Confederate side this time around instead of making our way through the ravine, and then we'll move towards the ravine just like Texas did. Now, before we get to telling the story about the battle out here, I wanted to pause out here in the middle of this field, because off in that direction over there is where the parking lot was that we were just at, talking about the 11th Mississippi Monument that's out here. And then we parked over by the Watt House, walked down through the ravine, back up to the top, and then across these farm fields here on the road that's provided, so that we could get over here to this section where the Gaines Mill, roughly the staging area for some of the Confederate soldiers, would have been going across this field. Now, the Battle of Gaines Mill is kind of just like any other battle during the American Civil War, in the fact that it didn't just happen in the place where the National Park has it captured. At New Cold Harbor, some of the staging area was over there for the Confederate soldiers. All in the woodlot that's here behind me, or in front of me. You can see it right there behind me. There's staging places out there where Confederate soldiers are getting ready to come out and be a part of the action out here. Miles down the road, more Confederate reinforcements are coming up as the fight's happening over here. That's where Hood's men comes into play. Hood's men had been sent off up north to reconnoiter with Stonewall Jackson. And the idea was they were going to go to Washington, D.C. and feign an attack. It was going to draw some of the forces from the Peninsula campaign away from them and to keep further reinforcements of McClellan's men out here in this Peninsula campaign to save Richmond, essentially. When Robert E. Lee took over, he decided that he needed to have those forces over here for this fight. And at the same time, he'd seen that the forces had kind of been separated, and there's a portion of it that's right in front of the Chickahominy that is that could possibly be captured or completely dissolved out here if a good enough fight takes place. So he decides he's going to attack the men here close to Turkey Hill, and he's going to get all of his forces in force, and timing has to be essential to all of this. If they come up at the right time and they attack at the right time, then he can get the men across this field, wrap around that force, possibly capture a big portion of it, and at the least, he can destroy that portion of the army and force it back into the river. The timing portion of it doesn't exactly work out in his favor, but the fight here becomes an overwhelming victory for the Confederate forces that are out here. And stretching out across this field is the largest single frontal assault in the entirety of the American Civil War. It happens right here. There's hardly a marker up out here. There's hardly a sign. There's one or two over on the parking lot area where the national park is, and there's nothing out here in this field. So you're not really going to get an obstructed view. You can come out here, imagine it for yourself, but the soldiers never came back here really to place anything to mark the fight that took place out here. Now, stories were written. Soldiers did write books and diary entries and letters, and they talked about the fight here. And one soldier in the 4th Texas coming up from the Shenandoah Valley wrote that he could feel his heartbeat in his boot as he was marching up here. He was in the 4th Texas. That soldier could hear the booming of the cannons and the fight taking place out here, and they had not yet had a major fight. So this is the reason why he was starting to feel the fear, because real combat was about to happen. It must have been one awful sound for you to feel like that. That's for sure. But then later on, another man writes a book, and he tells his tales of his life in the 4th Texas, and he talks about a dog. That dog is that terrier that we're going to talk about out here. And this white terrier we're talking about was given the name Candy. And the reason why he was given the name Candy was because he was given to a man in Texas named Isaac, who received him from a candy maker there in Texas. The man's name was Montana. So Candy was given to Isaac in Texas from Montana. It's kind of a funny little twist of names there, if you will. The 4th Texas was 3 regiments that made up the Texas unit that was part of Lee's infantry out here in the Army of Northern Virginia. It's part of that famed unit that they would talk about Texas always moving them. Robert E. Lee said that himself. The 4th Texas was comprised of counties from the westernmost portion of Texas at that time, and the men that came from out there were rough Broncos, if you will. They were farmers and cattle herders and things like that. They were tough guys out on the range, and not to mention at that time, Texas was the wild, wild west. It wasn't a place like it is today where you can go grab a steak or hang out at the rodeo and watch your favorite NASCAR race, if you will. It's definitely one of those places where death and destruction is on a regular basis, and it's a hard place to live. There's a lot of heat, a lot of different animals out there, and just a hard scrabble life. So those people are pioneers, and that's what's out here in this field. The 4th Texas are a bunch of pioneers. Once the 4th Texas musters up and they're getting ready to go, they make their way to Richmond, and they would be assigned to Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, which at the time was not Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. He was not yet in charge, but they're assigned nonetheless, and they're itching for a fight. They haven't seen combat yet. As a matter of fact, one soldier decides he's going to forego his furlough so that he can stick around just in case there's a big fight. This is how ignorant these soldiers are in the beginning of the American Civil War. They think of this as some huge adventure that they're on, and not some death and destruction and terrible life that they're about to lead. they don't yet understand how bad it can really get. So they're all just itching to fight. And they get their first taste of combat in the Peninsula Campaign at Eltham's Landing on May 7th of 1862. Now, just to demonstrate exactly how tough these guys are, Texas was sent up to Stonewall Jackson in the Shenandoah area right outside of Stanton, and they were to reinforce him and make their way over to Washington, D.C. Well, not too long after that, Robert E. Lee recalls Stonewall Jackson, and he wants those forces over here. Those men would end up making a 10-day march and would cover 400 miles of ground during that march. They would get to Richmond and stop just long enough to get ammunition and to get some rations before they go into combat. So already they're at a pretty bad disadvantage, and they're really tired. They're footsore. So these soldiers are now earning their right to go into combat. Lee's positioned his forces out here, ready for the fight here at Gaines Mill. And he knows Texas is coming up. Well, for the last couple of hours, Lee has had Longstreet and he's had Hill in the fight, and they've been repulsed. They're not exactly taking the position that Lee's told them to take. The fight is not working out the way Lee wants it. So Lee rides out the Telegraph Road and sees Hood there. And as he rides up to Hood, he asks, "Can you take that position?" And Hood looks at him, and in kind of maybe, he says, "I will try," almost annoyed with the question. But Hood does try. He gets his men out here and forms them up for the fight. And that's where everything starts to take off. Now Whiting rides out the Hood, and he points to a hilltop where there's artillery across the field over here. And he tells Hood that that's the next objective. That's the location that they have to clear out. Hood yells in reply, "I have a brigade that can take that hill." He's talking about the 4th Texas. He gets the 4th Texas out and ready to go, and he tells all of them, do not fire until I tell you to fire. And the reason for it is he doesn't want them to stop and have to reform their lines once they get to the woods, because he knows them stopping to fire is probably going to break up their lines, and they're not going to be able to keep that front going all the way through. So they line up, they dress off, and they make their way across the very field that I'm walking on right now. So now it's 4:15 in the afternoon. Hood has his men dressed off and they take the field. Now let's kind of go through what exactly Hood is going to have to go through here. Now I'm walking out of the clearing back there, and that's roughly out there where the powhite is, and the mill would have been back in that direction itself. And I'm going up to a ridge line here that at one point in time, General Longstreet had his men dress off and form up to head across the field. And as I get up to the ridgeline here, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to show you everything behind me, and then I'm going to explain the obstacles that the 4th Texas had to deal with going across this field. Now it's time for a little battlefield orientation. So off in the distance out here, that's where you have Mississippi over there, Louisiana, and all those guys lining up. Alabama's out here. We have Virginians out here. And making our way across from where AP Hill's position is, AP Hill's position moving across this way. Texas is out here in this general direction, headed towards, you can kind of see a rise in the trees, so let's imagine that a hill is over there beyond those trees. Now remember, at that time, not only was a lot more farming happening out here, but this place was being prepared for combat. So some of the trees over there were actually chopped down too, because they were creating abatis for their earthworks out in the wooded area there. And then Longstreet's men are going to stretch off and cover the right flank eventually, and line up with Texas Brigade here in this position. When we round this corner here, we're going to go off into the tree line there, and there's a Texas monument over there. So you see Texas is lined up here, and they're actually going to make their position and go across the field in this general direction here into the woodlot right there. And 4th Texas ends up leading the way out there. So what's some of the obstacles that these guys are facing? Well, other than the fact that it's hot out here, because it's hot out here today, and this is June, it was June at the time that they fought this battle. You go across that field there, there's a ravine down at the bottom where there's a creek. And at the time, the creek was a lot wider and a lot muddier. On the other side of that hill, well, the skirmishers are on this side, and they're forward deployed to help slow down the forces that are coming. And then on the other side of that hill, there are 3 lines of men behind entrenchments and abatis. And they are basically protected. They have been sitting back there fighting all day long against Hill and Longstreet, and they've been very successful at it. By the time 4th Texas comes along, men have died over there, men are wounded over there, men are hot and tired over there, and they are about out of gas, essentially. And Texas is fresh. They are ready to get into the fight. And they have yet to see what a major fight looks like for themselves going into combat. So they are excited to do this. They get out there, and Hood is on horseback. He gets off his horse, and he stands in front of his unit. And his unit, plus other soldiers around him that are not assigned to him, that don't really know who he is, he looks at them and says, "Follow me." And with that, they take off and they go towards the woods. Now, that's a pretty inspiring moment when a leading officer actually gets off the steed and stands out front with that sword and leads them off into the charge into the woods. So imagine that. And not only is he doing that on a peaceful day like this, where the sun's shining and the wind's blowing and you're sitting in the shade and everything feels cool. No, he's doing that out here on this field, where the cannons are roaring across the way. You can see the fire from the hill every time they light off a cannon. And then the explosions happen overhead. Those cannonballs aren't really, the fire isn't really meant to just come rolling down the hill and barrel at you. It's meant to explode with a timed fuse so that there's shards of all of this metal raining all around you and knocking holes into your lines. These guys are out here in this wide open space, and that's what's taking place, along with the sounds of combat that's ahead of them in that woodlot over there. They know that they're about to head in straight to the face of hell, and they're going to take it on headlong and try to break that line. Now remember, the story that we're originally telling out here is that white terrier that's out here with the 4th Texas. Now that dog's a companion and a friend. And one soldier writes about that dog saying that they never saw that dog cross a river, wade a river, or cross on foot a muddy bog of any sort unless it really wanted to. That the soldiers that were with him, there's not a man among them that wouldn't have split their last ration with that dog. That's how important that dog was to the 4th Texas. He became a mascot, just like Sally the dog in Gettysburg. And he was a companion to those soldiers. Along the way, leading up to Antietam, Candy was a best friend and a pal to every one of them. And during their down periods, their moments when they're sitting in camp and they're all sad and missing home, and missing the loved ones back home, they can all kind of let that boy in them come out and have fun with Candy, and he can be a good companion, someone they can talk to and pet and play with and remind them of home and remind them of maybe their own pets that are back home, and maybe even their children who probably have a dog. That's really what this is about for these guys. It's about building up their morale, and this dog has become very important to them at this point. And by the time they get to Antietam, that dog is a full part of the unit. Here in just a second, I'm going to make the round the corner over here in the direction of where Texas was coming from. I'm actually going to be in the footsteps of the 4th Texas. I'm going to flip this thing around so that you can see us as we're heading. You can see the direction I'm headed, and you can actually walk in the footsteps of 4th Texas yourself, and you can see what the terrain looks like as we're going towards the woodlot. And then I'll also flip it around as we go into where the ravine is and show you the angle at which it drops down towards the ravine and the creek at the bottom. If you're going into it really fast, you might fall on your face. That's how steep it is. So this is going to be a pretty cool moment to see in the video. I'm just standing out here on this field and I'm just amazed at the vast open fields, and wow. Even with it being super hot, you know, the beauty of it all. This is a beautiful day. This field is something else. It's not heavily traveled like Gettysburg and Antietam. It's not Chickamauga where hundreds of roads intersect and hundreds of monuments litter the ground. This is one of those fields where you can go here and reflect, and you can just kind of get a feeling for the fight that would have happened out here. And I don't know, you gain a fresh perspective of what these soldiers went through when they marched on these fields, and some of them marched to their deaths. It's amazing. So now I'm out here on this farm road and I'm headed towards the ravine area. And you can see out front of me here, the gentle sloping hills where Longstreet's men would have been right here to the right-hand side. And Texas, roughly, is out here in these fields. And they are coming across in this direction. And here in a minute, we're going to make our way from this position down toward that tree line where the Texas monument is, and then make our way out into the actual ravine. And we'll stop along the way And we'll talk about Colonel Warwick telling his men to halt and take aim and fire. Did not go over well with Hood. So now we're coming back here across the park boundaries, the fence here, and as we round the corner you'll see the Texas monument in front of the tree line. And there it sits. Now there's a road that turns right across the street from the parking lot we were at where the 11th Mississippi Monument is. You can drive down through here and park out here and go in either direction, or you can go over to where the Watt House is and just make the entire tour. If it's a hot summer's day like it is today, temperatures are 98 degrees out here currently, and the humidity level, who knows? It feels like a swamp. This might be one of those days that you might want to park in the middle instead of parking all the way at the Watt House and just do one portion instead of the entire thing. But lucky for us, we're acclimated to it and it's not that big of a deal. It's actually nice out here right now with the wind blowing. But there's our Texas monument. And Texas, like we said earlier, is coming across these fields here. And they're making their way through. Now this field's a wide open space at that time. There's not as many trees right there. And somewhere out in that vicinity is where Pickett actually gets wounded. So as we get into the tree lot over here, this is where Warwick halts his men. He stops them. Now Hood had specifically said, do not stop to fire. Warwick gets in his position and tries to halt his men and tries to get them to take aim. And Hood says, not here, for God's sake, forward, forward. And with that call, Warwick stops what he's doing, gets his senses about him, and the men go plunging down the ravine. And in a minute, we're going to go walk right down that area over there where those very men would go running down this ravine towards their enemy at the bottom where that creek is. So now Hood yelled at Warwick and he's told them to go forward, which is exactly what they're going to do out here at this field. And they're going to go in this general direction where I am right now. As they go down this ravine, the first line that they're going to run into is Martindale's men at that first line of defense. When they get to the other side of this ravine, they're going to smack them head on, and those men are wore out. They're not prepared for another charge. So then they start to fall back. Well, when they fall back, the men in the second line are now trapped. The men in the second line can't fire because they can't fire at their own men that are in front. So what happens? The charge continues. The second line is now trapped and they are getting hit from the front as hard as they can. There were men that said that every single bullet that was fired from a Confederate gun at that time was hitting a mark, meaning it was going to hit a body. That's how thick they were. Well, the men in the second line collapse. Now the first and second line are scattering up the hill towards the third line. The third line is stuck in the same position that the second line was in, And then eventually all three of those lines start to collapse and fall back on the hill. The only thing left in the way of this army, this Union army being completely wrapped up over here, is artillery, and eventually the cavalry. And the cavalry, on a strange twist of fate, turns out that it is the same unit that Hood himself once was in charge of, was an officer for. So it's a pretty amazing thing that happens out here. So here we are on that ravine, and I'm going to start making my way down towards the creek so you can see the terrain as we make our way down there. Now mind you, these men are just now coming up out of the tree, or the flat open space out here in the heat. And they've got a lot of gear on them, probably that big heavy 15-pounder, and they're coming down through here at a rapid pace, bashing the skirmishers back. And while they're pouring through here, some of AP Hill's men that have been fighting out here for the last couple of hours are actually rushing to the rear and going past Texas. They can see them looking like they're retreating, but really they're being relieved, and they know they are. As you can see, this terrain is not exactly the easiest to get downhill, but it's pretty amazing. The embankments here, they're on this hill heading down towards the creek at the bottom. Another thing you notice when you come down here on a hot summer day is as you make your way down here towards the bottom, the temperature almost feels like it drops like 10 degrees. The wind's not blowing in here, but because of all of the foliage, the temp has gone from like probably 98 out there to about 90. It feels really good down here, if you can get past all the mosquitoes. And here we are at the creek. Now remember, there's no bridge here at that time. So you're making your way across this creek, the muddy waters, and you're having to make your way up this embankment that's right in front of us, as their men are scattering and retreating all through up here, all throughout. Now the men in the Fort Texas got their dander up. Meanwhile, Candy the dog is nowhere to be found. Likely roaming the field back there, not making her way into this wooded area. And Warwick gets up here, has a flag in his hand, and he goes across this ravine and gets to the first line of earthworks with that flag planted, boom, into the earthworks. And then, boom, a shot rings out, hits him right in the chest, punctures his lung, and down goes Warwick with the flag still in his hand. As a result, Captain William Townsend ends up finding himself completely in charge of this entire unit. And Hood, still out front leading the way, is driving those men further in that direction. When they finally make their way towards this hill and they get further up, the cannons are going off and the fire is just ripping holes in the lines of the 4th Texas. So Hood stops the men, he reforms the lines, and he gets them prepared to go to the top of that hill, and then they make their way again in formation. Now, you got to consider the type of warfare at the time, Napoleonic warfare. For them, it was very important to mass your men and make your way towards the enemy that way. It ensured that more of your bullets would make the mark ahead. They get to the top of the hill, and here in a minute we're going to make our way out to the top of this hill to where the cannons are placed, and that's where the artillery would have been, right on top of the hill. And you can see this clear open space right in front of you as soon as you make your way out of this wooded area in the park. And the cavalry come charging in from off in this direction over here, and you can hear the sabers clanging and the horses, the hoofbeats and everything, and it's just a spectacle of craziness. A lot of the soldiers wrote about it after the battle had taken place, but almost immediately they fail. The cavalry's pushed back, the artillery has to limber up and take off. Many of the guns are captured up here, and it's a complete and total success. And by that time, it's really getting dark out and the fight ends. So Lee can't follow it up, and the Union soldiers make their way out of here and live to fight another day. So behind me here is a marker for Wilcox, and the Alabamians came through here, but also George Pickett was wounded out in that area. George Butterfield, on the other hand, was out here realizing what was taking place, and his thought process went from fighting to survival. And the actions that he performed here at this location would go on to earn him the Medal of Honor. Not too long after this battle, he leaves here and he heads toward Harrison's Landing. It is at Harrison's Landing where taps is actually performed for the first time and created. And it can be heard ringing out along the hills there, gently across the river. Both the Confederate Army and the Union Army could hear those sounds for the very first time at Harrison's Landing. And we did a video a while back over there at Harrison's Landing with one of our subscribers who also volunteers there at Harrison's Landing. And it was an excellent video, and we talk about that taps being performed there. I'll put a link in the description to that video so you can go see it for yourself. Nearing the end of this battle, General Hood stands at the top of this hill, and a man from another unit comes up to him, and he's reporting in. This man has his arm essentially hanging by a thread, but he's still reporting in for duty. It's something that Hood doesn't forget. It's also one of those moments that really is replayed over and over again during the American Civil War, because soldiers are dying all the time and being maimed during this war. And the things that these guys had to see and live through, is something out of a horror movie, really. It's something you'll never forget. So I'm coming out to the clearing now, and just up on the ridge line here, you're going to see the peak of the White House, and you're going to see the cannons just as we go up over the ridge. This is the high ground. This is the perfect place for artillery to be positioned, and it's the primary reason why those Confederate soldiers were not able to take this position so easily. And here we are. It's amazing. Fort Texas out here on this field would end up being the one Texas unit to lose the most. 44 killed, 208 wounded, and 1 missing. But there's another one missing that's not on the reports. Candy the dog. Candy is roaming these fields, but by the time the soldiers get up here, they're too tired and exhausted from their fight to do anything else. So they collapse exactly where they're at, right here on these fields. And they bed down for the night, and they get some rest, not knowing where their mascot is. But back off in the distance out there, across those fields that we just crossed over, that hot, sunny field, 98 degrees, dust kicking in the air from the farm fields, and at the time, crops were probably walked all over. Candy the dog is laying underneath the arm of a soldier that has died out there, and he likely gave the guy some last-minute comforts before he passed away. The dog, however, is unharmed. The Fort Texas reunite with their pup, and they make their way through the rest of the campaign. And Candy goes all the way to Antietam with the Fort Texas. But then the Fort Texas goes into the fight in Antietam at a place that would be forever known as the cornfield. A soldier falls wounded out there from the Fort Texas and ends up on the surgeon's table. And as he's sitting out there on the surgeon's table, he looks out into the distance and he can see a white terrier dog, his Candy, roaming around with Federal soldiers parading it as a trophy of victory. The Fort Texas never reunited with Candy. The dog was captured as a war trophy and never given back. And no one knows what happened to Candy. But the very man that wrote about Candy, he went back home to Texas. And as he gets back home to Texas, he stops on his property, and a dog that was 3 years old that he left behind when he went off to war at the beginning of the war didn't recognize him, was barking at him. And the man looks down at the dog and says, "What's the matter? Don't you know your old friend?" Quickly the dog stops, cocks his head to the side and looks at him. And then as he continues to speak, the dog recognizes his voice, jumps up onto him and puts his paws on him, licks him, wags his tail, and frantically runs in circles around his owner. His owner had come back home. His friend was there to greet him. And that family would be reunited at the end of the American Civil War. It's tales like these that make these stories, that make the Civil War come to life, really, and it brings it home to you. Imagining the dogs out here and the people that sacrificed and fought and died on these fields. It's amazing. There was not a man in the regiment who would not have divided the last piece of hardtack he had with Candy. He never swam a river or waded through mud unless he wanted to. There was always some soldier ready to pick him up and carry him. Well, folks, I've had about all the heat I can take out here today. It was great bringing the story here of the 4th Texas and Candy, the dog, out here at Gaines Mill. A decisive Confederate victory here in Virginia. Coming up on the channel, we got some more videos for you. And we are going to be taking you back to Gettysburg again and talking about that fight that happened out there in 1863. Yeah, we got some good stuff coming up, so we'll see you around. Hopefully we see you out there in those fields too. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.